Now, some nation states get so inspired, they said, okay, let's develop a foresight capacity in the office of the Prime Minister. So in Singapore, they have a Center for Strategic Foresight. They have trained individuals in methodology. They advise ministers. Here's how the world may be changing. Here are possibilities for transformation for new products. Here are opportunities. So these scanners, foresight experts, find ways to influence policy. So futures is not just about the theory of possible preferred probable futures, it's also intervening and helping decision makers make better decisions. One futurist from Singapore said, you can't just give them information, you have to give them alternatives. Then you have to help them say, here's the way we're going to go. How do we make the case for that? To make the case for influencing policymakers, our research in future studies has been very clear. We have to both present data on how the world is changing, and we have to help shape the story. We have to find a better metaphor. So foresight work is data-driven and story-driven. If we put those two together, we have the possibility to help organizations create the preferred futures they want. Another area of foresight work is in cities. I've worked with cities throughout the world, working with mayors, councillors, the professional experts. What are the particular futures of a city and city futures in general? Now, why city futures? National futures can be more challenging because it's so big, but cities are the right size to make a difference. So among the projects, we've had cities ask themselves, well, what might our city look like in 2047? One city said, well, it takes 30, 40 years to change the skyline. So you have to start to think through the long-term future. Another project was, well, how can cities be greener? We know research is very clear. If you have congested cities, you get bad health outcomes. If you have congested cities, productivity drops. So we start to think through transport solutions, but congested cities also lead to bad health. So one of the main things of foresight in cities, how do we enhance the health of our citizens? Part two is, how do we make smarter cities? Now, city foresight is, how do we redesign the city for the preferred future? To do that well, we found we have to listen to citizens, we have to get the data from the experts, and we need political involvement from the mayors and city councilors. So foresight in cities is saying we can see our cities have major problems, sometimes pollution, sometimes congestion, sometimes poverty. How do we start to use the future wisely to rethink our city? Now, people say, well, why should we care? Isn't the main thing of cities just to collect rubbish, work on roads, charge citizen rates? It's called the roads, rates, rubbish perspective. The other view is, well, cities are going to change in any case. Population change, capital flows. In what ways can cities control their own destiny? Now, to do that, it has to be very personal. We've run visioning workshops where we ask mayors, in 2030, what are you doing? What does your city look like? It's actually asking people in their day-to-day life, what's their preferred future? Once we ask that question, then mayors, councillors say, I can make a difference. At the same time, futurists are not naive. We understand political leaders want to support a vision that helps them get re-elected. They cannot deliver the vision unless they can stay in political power. So futures in cities is powerful because the dimension is appropriate. They can make change. Citizens can make a difference. Experts can gather real-time data on what's occurring in the city. Councillors can work with experts and citizens. And in fact, we know in the next 30, 40 years, we may see the emergence of city-states. Cities are growing. Most of the world's population is already living in cities. That will keep on growing. We have to work with cities to anticipate problems and in fact create opportunities today. Foresight work is a fantastic way to do that. Another example of foresight in practice is in policing. There's an international policing process called Pearls of Policing, which has said, okay, we know the top commissioners are very busy solving today's problems. If we want to influence the futures of safety, we need to train tomorrow's commissioners. So every year we take 15 to 20 deputy commissioners, senior leaders through a process to think about what are the futures of policing. We work with policing leaders and we go through a process of asking themselves, what are today's problems? How should policing address tomorrow's problems? Now the crucial part here is they're not focused on the present, but they figured out we need to influence tomorrow's leaders, to start to influence leaders 10 years from now. The second thing they're doing is they're challenging today's models of policing. They're asking what are the different scenarios beyond business as usual. So for example, a used future in policing is policing by driving around. The research is actually it doesn't lead to more safety. It's not good for the environment. So we're starting to think through what are some wiser, smarter ways to do policing. Clearly, if you move to big data, you can start to think of where are crime areas, so we put resources there. Second, we have to think through how do we bring in other stakeholders? How can we use the community? How can we make citizens our friends? So for that to occur, we have to change the story from the thin blue line to stories where citizens are part of the policing process. So Pearls of Policing is one, thinking of the long term, two, training senior leaders to become commissioners who are foresight oriented, three, looking at scenarios for policing, four, challenging the current use future and coming up with innovative ideas. So in that sense, that's a great example of foresight in practice that can make a difference. Certainly, future studies works at international levels for international organizations. It works at that national level. It works for cities, but it's also a very powerful tool for NGOs. I've worked with one group that works with the disabled, with the homeless. So they're always doing band-aid solutions. So they started to think through, well, how many more clients will we have in the next 10 years? What can we do today? Can we develop apps to help service providers? We know Uber is disrupting taxis. We know Airbnb is disrupting hotels. How can we use the new apps to find better solutions for the most vulnerable? So service providers can use foresight to ask different types of questions. Are they only doing band-aid solutions, or can they be designers in terms of creating different futures? Can they work with service providers? Can they work with the vulnerable to come up with alternative futures? So foresight work is a very powerful tool for NGOs. Now, of course, NGOs are very busy solving today's problems. So sometimes an individual NGO, it may be too difficult, but a group of NGOs can work together. Whether it's the caring industry, social services. I worked with one group and they were a caring organizations. So they started to ask themselves, what are some different ways we can fundraise? We normally do TV ads. How about we do crowdsourcing? How can, again, we use new technologies to bring people who care together? And the next thing they ask, how can we go upstream? Again, their metaphor is the Band-Aid. How can we, in fact, not just deal with the consequences of poverty, how can we help change the drivers of poverty, the causes of poverty? For that, we have to think through how is the world changing. We want to challenge capitalism. We may need to understand what's after capitalism. We may need to empower citizen groups. So foresight work is not just for corporations. It can empower local NGOs, work with citizens, service providers, the most vulnerable, to create alternative futures.